From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name's Warren Bernard. I'm the Executive Director of the Small Press Expo. We are a supporter, a sponsor of the National Book Festival, as well as running one of the preeminent graphic novel and independent comics festivals in the United States. We also have established a independent comics and mini comics collection at the Library of Congress. So we're very, very involved with them, and we're very happy that they asked me and us to go ahead and be part of this event. I've got the privilege of introducing Jaime Hernandez, and as a little background, in the history of comics, Frank King, who did Gasoline Alley, was known for aging his characters. He started out with Skeezix as a little child, and then they eventually got older. Now, Jaime's aging of his great characters, Hopi and Maggie, haven't been as great, but as you've watched them age from these science fiction punk rockers into the middle-aged adults they are today, it's really amazing how he captures what it's like to go ahead and go through that aging process and what family is like going through that aging process. If you want a really good feel for that, read the series The Love Bunglers that he did in 2012, which won a bunch of awards. Jaime's won a bunch of our Ignatz Awards, a bunch of Harvey Awards, and I can't say enough about him. His artistry is fantastic, and oh, by the way, his writing is second to none. So this is Jaime, and then over here, this is Mike Rody, a good buddy of mine. He is on the staff of the Washington City paper, reporting on comics in both the print and the online editions. He has done, what was it, Harvey P. Carr in Conversation. He also is one of the most noted bibliographers of the comics world that is known actually internationally. So anyway, here's Mike Rody, Jaime Hernandez in Conversation. Thank you very much.
Try moving this up a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
I guess we're talking.
Okay. So who was here for his brother Gilbert? Can you raise your hands? Okay. So
Okay,
only about half of you.
He basically said everything, so.
I know, I was worried about that. Half my questions are gone. And then question number 2 is, Jaime and I were chatting online a little bit during the week, and we're wondering how many of you are familiar with his work, if we could see a show of hands. Okay, about 2/3 then. Okay, great. So, Jaime, you and your brother have been doing this for 30 years now, Lovin' Rockets. And he was talking about the fact that there were a lot of comics in the family. Just comic books were lying around the house. He mentioned the ones that he read. I assume it's roughly the same for you. So were you influenced by the same people? Karl Barks, the underground comics?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I was, my brothers Gilbert and Mario were older than me, so I got into the undergrounds later because they were kind of dirty comics, you know, and I was afraid Mom would get mad, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing. So it took me a little longer to get into them, but my brother's influence was there because they always had the comics there,
Right.
and so being the fourth in line of the brothers, it was natural for me to just copy what they did, you know.
Right.
I drew comics because they drew comics. I read comics because they read comics, you know. It was just the thing to do. So yeah, I read the same comics Gilbert did, and I was influenced by same artists, and but sometimes our discoveries came at different times, like I had been reading the Archie and the Dennis the Menace comics, you know, for the same ones over and over again. Every summer, Mom would bring out the bags of them, and we'd be able to read them. And the older I got into my teenage years, I still liked looking at them. And even if they were considered kid comics, I still liked looking at them. But I kept picking out the ones that kept speaking to me, you know, the better artists, the better storytellers. And I started to, you know, say, okay, I like this guy better than this guy, you know, because those companies always had a lot of different artists, like especially Archie comics,
Right.
you know. And while I liked most of them, there was the few that were sticking out, like, you know, Dan DiCarlo, who drew Betty and Veronica, Harry Lucy, who drew Archie, you know, and I started going, hey, I like this Lucy guy, this Harry Lucy guy, you know. I like the way he does the character's body language. I like the way he makes them stand and act, and I like the way he tells stories. These very simple gag stories, but he just had a way of just making them move,
Right.
you know. And so that stuck with me. Same with the Dennis the Menace comics. They didn't have as many different artists drawing them, but the two artists I really liked, but I started to follow the one Gilbert was talking about, Owen Fitzgerald. I really loved the way he just made characters alive, you know. And I think it's a real trick for these artists that to draw a Dennis the Menace comic, it was Dennis living in a house with his mom and dad.
Right.
You know, there wasn't nothing fantastic to hide behind for the artist.
Right.
You know, if you're drawing for Marvel or DC, you got to do the Fantastic Four, you got to do all these fantastic elements.
Right.
Well, I thought the real trick was when they aren't doing anything fantastic,
Right.
the real artist started to shine through. And it was easier to do it with an Archie comic and a Dennis the Menace comic because they were not about fantastic superhero stuff. And that's why I still am, those are some of still my favorite artists, even if they were doing pretty much kid stuff, you know. But it really showed through. Yeah.
So they had tended to specialize in short stories, though, 8 pages, right, generally speaking. Did you find yourself, when you started your own book, did you find yourself quickly feeling constrained by the people that you had, not exactly mentored under, but the people you had enjoyed had always done short works? Your brother talked about planning on doing a story that was only 2 issues long, and then Palomar ended up running for hundreds of pages.
Right.
Did you have a similar changeover with your own work? Obviously you did. You started doing longer stuff.
Yeah, I knew it was an open canvas, that I could make it as long as I wanted or short as I wanted, you know. I remember in the very second issue, I did a 40-page mechanic story. That was new for me, to do something that ambitious. And it was only because Gilbert had a 40-page story in the first issue. I thought, hey, I'll have a 40-page, you know, it was that simple, you know. And I said, let's see if I can fill it. You know, it was a learning experience as I was going along. You know, to this day, a lot of Maggie stories start out where they're just going to be a 10-page story and that's it. But Maggie's character, I know her so well, her character takes over and she makes it drawn out. That's why there's so many Maggie epics, really long ones, because the characters I know better in my head, write longer stories, more involved stories. And so Maggie stories run when they're supposed to start out at 6 pages or 10 pages, you know.
Do you hear the characters' voices in your head? Do they like speak to you? Or?
There's no sound. They're just their inflections. They're, you know, I can picture Maggie and Hopi talking, but I'm picturing them in real life. I'm not picturing the drawings.
Oh, really?
Most of my ideas are really I'm picturing real life. I just have to translate that into lines on paper. You know, that's why it comes out that way.
That actually leads to a really late question, which was, had you ever considered adapting this to film or television?
I have. It's just difficult for me because I'm so in charge of my world that letting strangers in, you know,
I can understand that.
It gets pretty hard listening to them tell me what my characters are.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
and even if it's a honest attempt, you know, and they really are enthused to translate it, I'm going, but I'm not hearing my characters in this.
Right.
You know, so I run into that problem a lot. And then a lot of times there's someone who's sincere who really wants to do it and they want to do it right and everything, but they got no money.
Right.
You know, so with all the Hollywood talk and back and forth, after a while I get tired and I go, comics are so easy.
Yeah.
You know.
Which actually will take me back. So do you do it all yourself still? Do you do all the lettering? Do you spot the blanks?
Everything is still on the paper, pen and ink.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so the only digital part then would be when you scan it to send it off to Fantagraphics?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I used to mail it, the issue, to them, and then I discovered a scanner, and I was so proud of myself. I entered the 20th century, not the 21st century, but the 20th century, and I was like, hey, I can do this. But that's as far as it gets, you know.
Okay. Which actually leads to you've been working in black and white essentially for all these years now. You've done a little bit of color stuff, but is that an aesthetic preference or is it a time preference?
It's a number of things. Partly it's a control issue. I don't do Photoshop. I don't know how to do Photoshop.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, every time I've had something colored, someone else has done it for me.
Okay.
The creation, the experience, is so intimate for me. It's just me and the drawing board that it's all me, and so I just get control crazy.
Uh-huh.
And so when it's done and it's in black and white, it's done. You know, it's colored as far as I'm concerned.
Gotcha. Okay.
You know.
Does some of that come out of the punk aesthetic, the do-it-yourself feeling?
Yeah, it started out that way. I still draw my comics the same way I did in 1981. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you having a harder time finding supplies now?
I would say supplies are getting cheaper.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Materials are getting cheaper. Paper is getting cheaper now. It's I find that more than telling my stories now, my struggle with the latest issue is always making the material work on the paper, just getting it right without, like, you know, I'll lay out a whole thing, I'll pencil it, and then I'll start inking it, and it'll bleed.
Right. I've heard other people talk about the quality.
It didn't do that last time.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm finding it's every issue is kind of a learning experience. You know, it's like I'm relearning how to put it down. You know.
So how do you lay out a story? Do you write out a script first and then thumbnail it? Or?
It depends. Most of the time, I start off with a dialogue or a little script I write on a pad of paper, and like I'll say, I want to start this one with a car crash, and then take it from there. Then the story is written from there. Sometimes it's simple as, I want Maggie to wear this outfit.
Really?
You know.
Okay.
Yeah, and then sometimes when I'm doing the stories like that, I'm going along. They're mostly character written. The characters write them for me because I know them so well. Then every once in a while I have a story brewing in the back of my head. And by the time I'm ready to do it, I have a complete story to tell. But that's rare. I mean, for deadline-wise and time-wise, the characters help me a lot. They write a lot of it for me.
Okay. Which actually leads to another question. Did you have an overarching story in your head at some point where you wanted Maggie and Hopi to end up? Do you have one now? I'm thinking of Jeff Smith and Bone, who famously says he knew where it was going to end from day one.
Oh, no. I have ideas of who's going to grow old and who's not.
Yeah.
But it can change. You know, it changes every once in a while. The only one I can picture growing really old is Maggie, of course, because I know her so well. Yeah. Hopi, I don't know where she's going to end up. You know, because and it's kind of on purpose, because a character like Hopi, I don't want to know everything she's thinking. That's why Hopi doesn't get thought balloons.
Oh, okay.
You don't hear what she's thinking. She's just reacting to what's going on.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, Maggie's all thought balloon. Maggie wears her heart on her sleeve. You know exactly what Maggie's thinking.
Right.
Hopi, there's certain things I prefer to leave out because it helps me write her as a different personality, as a different character.
Going back to the beginnings, you had a lot of science fiction trappings in the beginnings with the mechanic stories. And then I would say the strip became more soap opera-like. And recently, when you guys relaunched, you reintroduced the fantastical element in things with Penny Century and the superheroes returning. Is that just over 30 years just trying to keep things new?
And trying to keep myself entertained.
Yeah.
You know, basically, I'll do something like I'm going to do a superhero story just to keep me interested. You know, I have to amuse myself as well as the reader, because or I'll be bored and I won't want to do it. I won't. So I'm constantly like, I won't write a pivotal part of the story. I on purpose won't have the ending or something, because I want to be surprised as well. You know.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the beginning a little bit. So are you guys native Californians?
Yeah. Yeah. Southern California.
Southern California, second or third generation? Or?
My dad was from Mexico and my mom was from Texas, and they came to our little town because of the work. Agricultural.
So that's what they did, agriculture?
Yeah. You know, packing houses, the fields, you know.
What did your parents think when you guys became comic book artists?
Well, our dad was already dead by then, but our mom was happy because we found something we loved.
Right.
And she was happy we had jobs.
Right.
You know.
Was she impressed?
I guess so. Yeah. It's just, you know, it's like, good for you, boy. You know.
Well, you know, she's been buying them, so you know.
You know, and then she gets really excited when we go, "Hey, Mom, guess who I met at a convention?"
Yeah.
You know, I met Jack Kirby, and she'll go, "Oh, old Square Fingers," you know, and she'll be just really like, "Oh, I used to love his comics," or something, and then I'll say, "Hey, I went to a convention in Spain and I hung out with Will Eisner," you know, and she'll go, "Spirit." You know, and she's just so warm to her, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you ever introduce her to any of the people? Or did she want to do that?
never.
She never was interested. Okay. So let's see. So when you worked on Comics in the Family, you guys have collaborated but infrequently. How did that division of labor end up working out, where you each did your own story in Love and Rockets?
It just happened that way because we were doing our own separate stuff as kids, and then our own separate stuff growing up. And by the time it was time to do Love and Rockets, Gilbert and I were doing our own stories, so it just naturally
just kept going.
happened that way. And people would say, "Are you guys ever going to do something together?" And I always thought, well, Gilbert doesn't need me. Gilbert can draw it, he can write it. He knows it better than I do, so I never. It was kind of like, Gilbert's a big boy; he can take care of himself.
Yeah.
I've never had to worry about his stuff being next to mine in the comic. Like, well, I don't know. Gilbert's kind of going a little crazy here, you know, because I know he knows what he's doing, and and being a fan of his work as well. You know, I trust him.
Right. Did you share a studio then? And do you still share a studio, or did you ever share a studio?
I remember once drawing in his bedroom for maybe a month or something. You know, had both drawing boards in there.
Yeah.
But then we just, you know, moved separate places.
Okay, so it's usually a solitary thing at home then for both of you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that get lonely?
Lonely?
Yeah.
Only when I want to not work and go to lunch or something,
Well,
finding somebody. But no, working, you know, the drawing, your world becomes the size of the drawing board, you know, and it's just you and the drawing, and there's something real special about that, you know.
Okay. How about the family bustling around? Have you found that to be a difficulty over the years, or do they know not to bother you?
What you mean? Well, I mean,
if you're just working in a room.
By the
home.
time Love and Rockets took off, we had already moved out and you know, and lived separate places.
Right.
So I didn't live with family members. there was a short time where I was out of money, so I moved back to Mom's and worked there. But no, they just kind of just like, oh, they're doing their comics.
Okay. Let's see. I was wondering about formal training. Gilbert had mentioned life classes and enjoying drawing women. Did you have formal training?
Just life drawing classes
Yeah.
and drawing classes and
Okay.
high school and junior college and stuff like that. But in those days, you couldn't have a class for graphic novels and stuff like that.
Right. But a lot of people did the advertising route or
Yeah,
did
the
a fine art thing.
when they used to have career day at my high school, the closest thing to comics was, commercial artist.
Right.
And I didn't even know what that was.
Okay.
But I would get that brochure and go, sure. So you just always wanted to do comics, and that was it.
Okay, so how did you start doing commercial art then? Because, I mean, you are an artist for the New Yorker now.
Oh, because of Love and Rockets.
Right.
Love and Rockets has never been the biggest seller. We've never been millionaires off it, but we always had word of mouth.
Right.
Love and Rockets was always a word of mouth thing, and as it progressed, the years progressed, people who read our comics started to become positions of art directors
Right.
and editors at magazines and stuff. And so they would say, hey, well, I like this artist, let's use this guy.
So it's just a phone call or an email out of the blue saying, hey, would you like to illustrate this?
I'm from
Okay.
the New Yorker, would you like to illustrate
Nice.
something? And a lot of times I say yes, and sometimes I'm too lazy.
I assume they're still paying fairly well compared to everybody else, though. So.
Well, that helps a lot. Can't draw comics by themselves.
Right. Has Francois approached you about a cover, or?
No, I'm not in the cover
Okay, so you're
level.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
But that's all
There's
right.
a whole book of your covers for sale.
But that's
in
all
the
right.
tent.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, it's okay because comics, like I said, comics are so much easier.
yeah.
I'm my own editor.
So when you send to work in on a commercial job, occasionally they ask for changes.
Occasionally.
Okay. And since you're not doing Photoshop, it's harder for you.
Yeah. And but yeah. So I get used to not having my stuff changed doing my
Right.
comics.
Oh yeah. Right.
So when I'm asked to do an illustration and then they say, "Can you change her nose?" and I'm going, "Are you kidding?"
Okay. Does Fantagraphics edit you at all? Did they ever edit you?
They tried.
They tried
In the
okay.
beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
No, pretty early on, Gary Groth, he could see that Gilbert and I knew what we wanted. We were focused,
Right.
and we were also responsible.
Right.
So he knew pretty early on to kind of back off, because it was kind of like how he discovered us by seeing that self-published one,
Right.
that he knew that we just had a vision. And he saw something in it, or I guess after he met us, just sensed that we were just
Right.
focused. And I mean, maybe some of the stuff he didn't understand, but he just knew not to step in. you know.
Okay. Yeah, Gary's about your ages, I think.
He's a little older.
A little
now.
older? Okay. Let's see. When and why did you make the decision to age the characters? You could have easily have kept going with Maggie and
Age the
Hosey.
characters? I was thinking it was when Gilbert thought about the strip Gasoline Alley, where he said, "I like the way they age," and I thought I remembered that I went, "Oh, good, I'll age them too." I was looking at sketches that I did earlier than that, and I had this little head chart of Maggie, and it said age 20 to 23,
Okay.
age 24 to age 30, and I was just showing her aging. So I think, I'm not saying I came up with it, I'm
Right.
just saying I think we thought of that long before Love and Rockets ever came out.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And when we started doing it in the comic book, there was aging them just kind of added to the storytelling.
Right.
Because I started thinking, well, I'm a pretty sentimental person as far as my childhood and my and just growing up and growing older, and then thinking back, oh, remember when I was 10 years old, this happened. So I thought, well, that's going to make the characters stronger, their personalities stronger if they do have a past. And also, almost that past gives them also a future.
Right.
Meaning
Okay.
the way, hopefully the way the reader looks at them. And that just makes the characters more human.
As opposed to a traditional superhero novel a superhero comic book where you end up with reboots because they can't age the characters.
Yeah. And, I look at a lot of the new, I go to the comic store and I see a lot of the Marvel and DC comics, and I look at the covers and I go, oh my God, this X-Men cover, I only know that's Jean Grey because this person's hair is red.
Right.
But she doesn't look anything like she did 10 years, and it's not important to them to keep the characters the same.
Right.
It's very important for me to keep Maggie and Hopi the same people all the way to the till I'm done.
So do you read any current comic books or any cartoonists?
What's that?
Do you follow any current comic books or any cartoonists these days?
Current ones, I'm mostly collecting old collections, there's those pre-code early 50s horror comics.
Yeah.
The ones that were copying the EC comics.
Right.
And I love them for their madness, the wackiness before the code came in and stripped everything.
Okay.
Which I have a theory that the superheroes survived because of the code, because they were dying when the horror stuff was out.
Right.
And then Wortham came and he just wiped all that stuff out, that stuff, and they were like, comics were just kind of like, ooh, what do we do? And then they put out this new version of the Flash, and they go, hey, it's taken off. Superheroes are taking off again, So I'm just curious about what would have happened if the code never came about, where comics were, because they were getting pretty violent. I mean, they were like Walking Dead in 1951.
Right. So do you think we would have seen something more like European comics here sooner, with albums?
I can't tell you.
Yeah,
I'm curious myself.
Curious, yeah. Oh well, we'll
of
never
what
know.
would have happened. Yeah.
Yep. So were you in particular also influenced by films and television?
Oh yeah.
Anything in particular?
For television, I grew up in the mid '60s, so regular television was Gilligan's Island and the Beverly Hillbillies and the Addams Family. I mean, TV was crazy in those days. But it was normal to me. I thought that's the way life was. And yeah, I grew up on movies and stuff like that. In fact, movies are one of the bigger influences on my work. I would say it's 1/3 movies, 1/3 comics, and 1/3 real life.
Okay.
They're all together.
So getting to the real life thing, since this is Hispanic Heritage Month, obviously both of you, or all three of you, including Mario's work is infused with a Chicano sensibility, or all the characters are that. Where to go with this question? Do you ever feel constricted by that, like you want to break out of it, or do you feel like that is such a part of your life that this is the stories that you have to tell?
Yeah, well, it's, for one thing, it's who I am, right? And it's all I know,
But nobody's ever been Spider-Man.
What's that?
Nobody has ever been Spider-Man. People do write outside their field.
But also because when we were starting our comic, there was no Hispanic culture in TV, or it was done wrong when it was done. And in a lot of things, just the culture we knew that we grew up with was not even rock and roll music. I mean,
Right.
was like, they're doing it terribly. That's not how rock and roll is. So Love and Rockets was kind of like this thing where we were going, well, let's do it right. Let's show them how that it can be done, how it really is, or to the best of our ability, you know. So, and that's the Latino thing. And it's kind of like, well, if we don't do this, who's going to do it? You know.
Okay. We've just gotten a 10-minute warning, so we'll open it to questions in just a second. But I want to ask how you feel about ebooks and electronic comics.
Well, my question, because I don't know that much about them, is do a lot of those artists draw them on paper and then put them on the screen, or do they draw them on the computer?
It varies tremendously. Basically, everybody does everything these days.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Because I was thinking, if it's just if a lot of them are done by hand, like I do them, and then they put them on the screen, that's just another piece of paper, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
essentially, yeah.
so I don't. When people ask me, what do you think about this wave of, you know, how it's going and stuff, I go, well, is it much different? You know, I mean, or like I said, I don't know that much about it. So the people doing it on computer, are they like have a different path they're taking? Like, this is not going to be like comics, this is going to be something else? Or are they
Some
just
are, yeah.
putting it
Yeah, some are.
on a
so,
screen?
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, well, some traditional comic book people don't really like to see their work adapted that way. They think it loses something by being on the screen and not having the tactile experience.
At this point in my life, whatever's going to make me money.
I agree completely.
You know, as long as you don't mess with the work I'm doing,
Right. Okay.
then the format that's going to make the most money, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm happy with.
Well, let's. Anybody who wants to ask a question, there's microphones on both ends, so feel free to step up.
Anybody?
And if nobody's coming up, I will continue to look through my questions here. Oh, we have a winner.
I have a question. I wonder whether you've thought of being a teacher. You said you didn't.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Did you think of being a teacher, becoming an instructor for people?
No, I'm the doer. I'm not the teacher. I don't know how to translate what I do and what I know to. That's why I have an interviewer here. Serious. My brother was fine talking by himself. I would sit up there going, I draw comics. You know, so yeah, I've been asked to teach before, and I just don't know how do teachers start? I mean, you go into a classroom and then say, okay. You know, it's just so foreign to me, and I really envy that, and because it's just something I could never understand. I could never translate what I've gotten here into that. Yeah.
Next question.
Do you think there's a kind of, you're talking about like the punk DIY like movement in comics. Do you think there's kind of a new movement or in just a new era with like, there's so many tools for young artists to come out and get their stuff to people and communicate, and with SPX being especially big this year, do you think that there's kind of a new era of DIY, or do you think there's something like inherent in comics? Like there's an Australian comic artist called Simon Hanselman that said something really cool, like comics are like TV studios for poor kids. Like, do you think there's something inherent in comics that anyone can do it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about comics is kind of how we started it. We just go, you can do anything you want. You know, people at SPX, you know, hundreds of them just doing their own comics. They're not even thinking about the success of making it or something like that. Maybe when they're older and have children, you know.
Probably gets a point. You're like,
Yeah,
oh,
but-
man, I'm really hungry now.
But it's just really cool because it's kind of like you say this is how comics are. Well, I don't care. I'm just going to do it this way. And a lot of really talented people's show through because of that freedom of of no rules. Even, people go, well, what do you think about that the comics are changing from your style, and this and that? And I go, well, because they can, and it's just really cool that they're using the same things we started with of like, just do it yourself. Do comics how you think they should be done, not how people tell you they are. Well, they're doing that too. They're not doing it like mine, but it's still the same freedom, the same expression, They're just taking it a different step, So it can only be good, till they want to make money. Then.
Okay, we've got a question on the far side.
I first wanted to say thank you for Love and Rockets, because as a 6-year-old who fortunately didn't have parents who overlooked her reading habits that's when I found your comic book first.
Oops.
And it was but it did show me from all the DC comics I've been reading that there were these amazing women in comics, and I kind of wondered that you talked about your work just reflecting the real people in your life, but once you started hearing from people that these were rare characters, did you work harder to make them more real and make them more forthright, or was it always just about the real women you knew in your life?
Yeah, it was a mixture of all that. But the thing was, when I get a compliment, like you gave me, thank you. When I get a compliment, I grit my teeth and say, now I got to go home and back it up. So I'm seriously, constantly trying to do it better. The more praise I get, the more I feel like, oh, damn, I got to work harder, and stuff like that. I never rest on that thing. In the beginning, when we first started doing it, and the first woman who approached me and said, I really like the women you do, I said, I've arrived. That's cool. That's cool. I was like, good, because that's what I want to do. And so, but I get that responsibility. I go, I got to do this right, because I'm writing this thing for the world, not just for my core group of fans. I want everyone to read it and like it and not be offended. Only the right people to offend. Right. Thank you.
Another question?
Hi, thanks. My husband is a huge fan, and I've read several of the Love and Rockets, and whatever he tells me to read, I read. So, so thank you for your work. I was really interested in your talking about how the characters write it for you, and I was wondering, how does Maggie communicate with you, for example? How do you hear her voice or what's happening next and put that into action?
A lot of times I start a story by just a dialogue. So I'm picturing her talking, Maggie talking to a person about a certain subject or whatever. Her answers are going to be different from if I put Hopi in there. So whatever, if Maggie is talking about something, I know it's going to go a different direction. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I go, well, I need this to stay on course this time. I need this to go in this direction. And so I replace Maggie with someone else who would answer this way instead of that way. Basically, you're going to call me crazy, but I'm picturing her living in the same town I am. I know where Maggie lives in LA. I know the area. So while I'm writing a story where she has nothing to do with it, if it's happening in Los Angeles or it's happening Texas or something, I know that there's that link. Maggie is somewhere in the world that I'm writing. And I don't know why it works, but it seems to work for me, just knowing her so well, and so yeah, I'm picturing, like, hey, I'm driving down Van Nuys, California. I know Maggie lives near here. She lives in the valley somewhere, and like I said, call me crazy, but it works,
I'm going to squeak in one last question. We've got our 1-minute warning, so come on up, Superman.
I'm actually Clark Kent.
Okay.
Anyway, So you were talking a little bit about when you started out, there wasn't a lot of that Latino voice or authenticity in a lot of the mainstream comic books. And it's interesting, just over the past 30 years, there have been a lot of different instances where the big publishers have tried to put out, for lack of a better word, like a token Latino character, but they've never really stuck around. And I'm just wondering, do you think, the popular publishers, do they have the capability to, essentially create a new character that's somewhat authentic and can be established? Someone who could at the same time be like a Latino Peter Parker, or like what you're seeing with the Code, we have mainstream comics so ingrained that these are the only kind of characters we want to hear from. There's no more room on the podium anymore for a Latino character to be both authentic and, I guess, established.
So what is the question? I'm sorry.
Basically, in big stream comics, is there a place for an authentic Latino character? Because
Okay, we got to cut you off there. Is there a place in mainstream comics for Latino characters?
Of course there is. There's a place for African American characters. There's a place for people from India. I don't know why they work in this structured thing. Well, they're working to what's going to sell. That's the bottom line. So let's say there's a creator who says, well, I want to make a character from the West Indies. And they go, we can do that. Can we do that? That's the way it works. It's company, it's money, it's corporate, it's all that. I don't have to worry about that. So yes, there's plenty of room for everybody in mainstream comics. They just, whether they're going to allow it in, they just got so many restrictions about. It kind of goes to what television and movies as well. Just whatever makes the most money is going to have this the tightest pathway of who gets to get through, and that's going to be what sells the most to what audience.
Yep, tough to argue with. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jaime.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.